Great. Well, question for you. Think back to your childhood. Does anyone at all remember fighting with their siblings? A few of you do. A few. Yeah, I remember. You ever have that feeling when you're so angry that your jaw starts to quiver, and then you get even more angry because you're embarrassed by that? I remember having, I think, more anger at siblings than ever at anyone else. Why do you think that is? Those closest to us.
Expect more out of them.
You expect more out of them?
Plus, you know, they love you. They have to love you.
They have to.
No matter how mad you get, they gotta love you.
And you're more yourself, right? You don't hold anything back. You're not worried about what they're going to think. You would think that the way to stop that from happening would be to have good parental rule in the family. A good household ruler would be able to keep siblings from fighting, right? Sometimes, probably a good, a well-ruled household would have less than a poorly ruled household. But the problem of how to rule a household well goes back to the very first household. And I'm not sure Adam did such a great job. I'm not saying it was his fault, but I guess Adam and Eve didn't have an example. We all had an example of how to parent. Whether that example was good or bad, we had an example. Adam and Eve had no example at all. So the issue of rule is actually all over the Bible. And I think sometimes we as Americans tend to ignore it because we don't have a king and we don't think about rule as much as the ancient world did. In the ancient world, every city had its own king. But think about how much that concept of rule comes up in everyday life. In every job situation, there's always the problem of how to be a boss and how to respond to a boss. In every church, the issue of rule comes up, and that can be a sticky issue. In every family, in every social group. Now, the social group rule is always under the current. It's never explicitly stated, but there's always leadership. There's always rule. I remember the ruler of my first and second grade class. His name was Jimmy Bosted. And we all listened to Jimmy, probably because he had failed first grade, and so he was a year older than all of us. But I remember on the first day of third grade at recess, Jimmy said, "Pass it to me." We had one of those big balls. And the kid with the ball had this one moment to decide. If he passes it to Jimmy, we have another school year of obeying Jimmy Bosted. If he doesn't, we're all set free. He doesn't. And we all at the same time realized we don't have to listen to Jimmy this year. And then, of course, the whole social web of that little elementary school class changed, and it was a new dynamic. But every social group, there's rule and leadership involved. So it affects every aspect of our life, this concept of rule, and it's all over the Bible. If you start looking for it, you'll start noticing it everywhere. So, let's turn to Genesis 37, the Joseph story. I guess you could also call this the Jacob story because it's about his family. And we are only going to scratch the surface, and we're going to look at just a couple themes. The theme of rule and the theme of change, those two things. So in Genesis chapter 37, It said, "Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, the land of Canaan, and these are the record of the generations of Jacob. Joseph was 17 years of age when he pastured the flock with his brothers while still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a varicolored tunic. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms." So Jacob, in some ways, was not a great ruler of his household. If you remember, his oldest son, Reuben, slept with Bilhah, his father's wife, would have been like his stepmother. Not something you want to raise your sons to do. His next two sons slaughtered an entire town. These are some bloodthirsty boys, men now. And also, Jacob shows favoritism. You would think that he would have learned what it's like to have your father favor the other son. His father favored Esau over him. You would think he would know what it's like to have brotherly conflict. There was more than once in his life he was afraid for his life from Esau. But he shows favoritism, and this, obviously, he should have seen this coming, but this caused great division among the brothers. And so Jacob, while not exemplifying great ruling characteristics, leadership characteristics, Jacob has this issue now. Now, towards the end of his life, when the story is moving to his sons from him, he has the issue of succession, which is always the most difficult part of rule. How does he pass on the family leadership? Obviously, his first three sons have disqualified themselves. And even though Joseph is only 17, it appears that Jacob wants to pass on the family leadership to Joseph. That's why he gives him that coat. That's, in the ancient world, that was a symbol of leadership. And he gives it to him, and obviously the brothers are not happy about this. Let's see what kind of leadership qualities Joseph displays. What's the first thing we learn about him? Let's see verse 2. At the end of the verse. "And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father." So he's a tattletale. Not a great way to engender friendly feelings from the brothers, the older brothers that you're supposed to lead. What else? Well, verse 5. "Then Joseph had a dream." Obviously, we know this story. He dreams about his brothers bowing down to him. And now, if I were in that situation, if I had had two older brothers who had slaughtered an entire town, and I knew that they didn't like me, I wouldn't be like, "Hey, guess what, guys? I just dreamed that you're all going to bow down to me." I might just keep that one under my hat for a while. So Joseph makes some foolish decisions, and those decisions come back to bite him. As you know, he gets sold into slavery. And he's lucky to get sold into slavery and not something worse. So, you know the story about how that comes about. His father sends him to go check on the brothers, and he comes, and when they see him from far away, they say, in verse 19, they say, "Here comes this dreamer. Now then, come, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say, 'A wild beast devoured him.' Then let us see what becomes of his dreams." So this is all the brothers here. It just says "they said." And we don't have one of them speaking. But in verse 21, Reuben heard this, and rescued him out of their hands and said, "Let us not take his life." Reuben further said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." So Reuben wants to rescue them, and it says his motive in the end of that verse. So he might rescue out of their hands to restore him to his father. So now Reuben wants to return Joseph to his father. He knows that his father loves Joseph. Now it doesn't say whether he's doing this because he wants to get back into his father's good graces and show his father that he can sort of tame the beast of this wild group of brothers. It doesn't say that, but he's thinking of his father. Notice he doesn't just say, "No, we can't do that, guys. That's wrong." And you know how sad Dad would be. He doesn't say that. He's like, "Well, let's just throw him into the pit. Let's not actually kill him." The question arises then, is he being cowardly? He doesn't want to come right out and say, "We can't do this. We can't hurt Joseph." Is he being cowardly and he's going to secretly sneak Joseph back to his dad? Or is he being shrewd? Because it's possible that he's just being shrewd and he knows what his brothers are like. And he knows that direct opposition won't work. Well, I think it's actually a little bit of both. Part of it's being shrewd because later, once he finds out Joseph's been sold, then he comes right out and says, let his brothers know how he really feels. So it's not entirely out of cowardliness, but yet he also never tells, "Hey, Dad, actually Joseph's not dead." He allows his father to think that Joseph's dead. So I think there's a little bit of both. But either way, it doesn't work. He isn't able to bring Joseph back to his father. Part of it is his poor attempts at persuasion. This attempt at leadership, it's one of the only ones that Reuben makes, an attempt at leadership. I think there's actually only 2 in the Bible, and this is one of them. It's just, let's not do that. Let's throw him into the pit. He doesn't give any motivation. Let's compare it to what Judah says. Judah takes leadership here in verse 26. Judah says in verse 26 to his brothers, What profit is it for us to kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." So Judah says, let's not kill him. So it's similar to what Reuben says. Let's not actually kill him. Let's just sell him into slavery. Not a big deal. That way we are not actually hurting him. He is our brother after all. And then we gain something. See how much better that is, guys? So Judah plays 2 cards. He plays, let's be good guys and not kill him, and let's make some money off of him. Judah plays both sides. And it says, after Judah's speech, and his brothers listened to him, which it doesn't say after Reuben's speech. So, the question about Judah now is not whether or not he's shrewd. We know Judah is shrewd. The question is he being shrewd to protect Joseph or to hurt Joseph? Is it out of kindness or cruelty? It's possible that it's out of kindness, that he wants to protect him from his brothers. But selling someone into slavery, I feel it's very hard to pass that off as kindness. If he is as shrewd as he appears to be, he could have come up with another way. He could have said, yeah, he's obnoxious, but, let's just not bother with him. Or something. Judah talks his brothers into selling him as a slave. That's a big deal. And then they, verse 31, they took Joseph's tunic and they slaughtered a male goat and dipped the tunic in the blood, and they sent it to their father And they said, we found this. Is this your son's? And of course, Jacob thinks his son has been killed. Now, here's a little side note, a little interesting side note. They use a robe and a goat to hurt their brother and trick their father. Who else in the Bible used a robe and a goat to hurt their brother and trick their father? He did. He did it to his brother and father, and now his sons are doing it to him. It's a little lesson in, I guess you'd say, what goes around comes around. I think there's actually a lot more to that, but we don't have time because we got to focus on this leadership thing. Okay, then there's chapter 38. Strangest chapter in the Bible, most R-rated, or one of the most R-rated. It sort of takes a sidestep from the Joseph story, and it's Joseph goes to Egypt, but it's like meanwhile back at the ranch, Judah has 3 sons, some horrible things happen. And then in chapter 39, it's back to the Joseph story. So we're going to skip that just for now, and it's very important that it's right there. At first, it seems like it's just inserted into the middle of the Joseph story, and for years I wondered, why is this chapter here? But it finally made sense to me, and I was quite excited when I figured that out. So, let's continue on with the Joseph story. You know what happens. He gets sold to Potiphar, and he does a great job of leadership there, but then once again, his robe is taken from him, this time by a woman, and once again, injustice, and he's thrown into prison. In prison, again, he shows great leadership qualities. So perhaps Jacob did see some latent leadership qualities in Joseph, because he does great as Potiphar's household, he does great in the prison. Then he eventually, becomes leader of all of Egypt, the most powerful civilization in the world at the time. So, it's not until chapter 42 that he runs into his brothers again. Let's see. Well, for the sake of time, let's just get down to the most important aspect. He says, I'm not going to sell you anything until you bring Benjamin back. It's kind of strange. They go back. Reuben tries to talk his father into sending Benjamin, and Reuben fails. That's really the only other time Reuben asserts his leadership. And then Judah does in chapter 43. Judah speaks to him. In chapter 43, verse 3, Judah talked to his father. He says, the man solemnly warned us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy food. But if you don't send him, we will not go down. The man told us, you will not see my face unless your brother is with you. In verse 8, he talks to him again, his father. He says to his father Israel, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, we as well as you and our little ones. So that's a good persuasion tactic there. He says, Dad, we have to take Benjamin. If we don't take Benjamin, Benjamin's going to die anyway because of this famine. And then in verse 9, I myself will be surety for him. You may hold me responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame before you forever. For if we had not delayed, surely we could have returned twice. So finally Jacob says, okay, take him. And they take him, and everything seems great. But Joseph, does anyone remember what Joseph does to Benjamin? Yeah, with his silver cup. He puts it in Benjamin's sack, and then they leave, and he says, the servant runs back and says, hey, you stole my master's cup. And they're like, wait. Sorry about that. He says, well, we didn't do that. And he says, if one of us stole it, let him be kept a prisoner. The servant says, okay. And they search the sacks, and it's in Benjamin's sack. So they all go back. You got to wonder, is Joseph being vindictive here? And they all go back and look at, let's see, where is it? Chapter 44, verse 16. Once again, well, actually in verse 14, notice it says Judah and his brothers. Judah is clearly the leader at this point. It's not vacillating between Reuben and Judah anymore. Judah and his brothers go back. Verse 16, Judah says, what can we say to my Lord? What can we speak? And how can we justify ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Behold, we are my Lord's slaves, both we and the one in whose possession the cup has been found. We'll all be your slaves. And they don't know they're talking to Joseph. But Joseph says, far be it from me to do this. The man in whose possession the cup has been found, he shall be my slave. But as for you, go up in peace to your father. What is he doing? What is Joseph doing? He's giving them every opportunity to do the same thing to Benjamin that they did to him. He's giving them every excuse. He's trying to find out if they changed. Remember, the favorite wife had 2 sons. Rachel was the favorite wife, and she had 2 sons. They were also the youngest 2, Joseph and Benjamin. And Joseph's been away for, let's see, I can't do math, 30 minus 17, 13 years. Joseph's been away for 13 years. He needs to find out if his brothers have changed. So he gives them every possible excuse. So if they still want to do this to Benjamin, they can say, well, we tried. We really tried, and Benjamin's gone too now. And what does Judah say? Judah, the one who was the ringleader in selling Joseph, Judah says to him in verse 18, 44:18, then Judah approached him and said, O my Lord, may your servant please speak a word in my Lord's ears. Do not be angry with your servant. And then he goes on, it's actually a really long speech, and he says, my father loves the boy, his life is bound up in the life of the boy, my father will die. And all the way down to 33, this is the key verse. At the end of his speech, he says, now therefore, please let your servant, he's saying, let me remain instead of the lad, a slave to my Lord. And let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with me? For fear that I see the evil that would come, that would overtake my father. Judah says, please let me stay as the slave. And what's his motivation? His father. And that is the point at which Joseph says, I'm Joseph. In the next verse, in chapter 45, then Joseph could no longer control himself before his brothers. And he reveals himself. Because he finally sees they have changed. What changed to Judah? How did Judah change from someone who didn't care about how his father felt to someone who will give up his own freedom and become a slave for the favorite son and for his father's feelings? Well, it's chapter 38. It's the story about Judah that seemed out of place. Now, I'm not going to go into details because you can read the details for yourself. Not really appropriate even for church. This is what happens. Judah has 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. And the first one marries Tamar, and God strikes him dead. And so the next brother is supposed to marry Tamar so that she can have a son. And he does something wicked also, and God strikes him dead. And now Judah's left to his last son, and he says, well, Tamar, You'll get my last son too, but let's just wait till he's grown up. So just live as a widow in your father's house until he's grown up. And let's see, that's in verse 11. Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up, for he thought, I am afraid that he too may die like his brothers. My first two sons married this woman and were struck dead. So Judah learns what it feels like to lose a son. Judah learns what it's like to want to protect your youngest. And then Tamar, who is thinking, after years go by, Judah's never given me Shelah, and Judah owes me a son. I'm supposed to have a son, and Judah isn't giving me a husband so I can have one. It was really important in that time for widows to have a son so that they could be provided for. Judah owes me a son, so she dresses up like a prostitute. Judah doesn't know it's her. Interesting that the price she asks for is a goat. And Judah sleeps with her and then goes away. 3 months go by, and it says in verse 24, now, after it was about 3 months later that Judah was informed, your daughter-in-law Tamar has played the harlot, and behold, she is with child by harlotry. And Judah says, bring her out and let her be burned. That's horrible. I can't believe she would do that. Burn her at the stake. While she's being brought out, she says, the guy that I am with child by is the one who owns this staff and this tassel. Sort of a form of identification in the ancient world. This is going to be a public execution. And while they're bringing her out, she says, this is the man, this is who the father is. Oh. What is his response? Verse 26. She is more righteous than I, inasmuch as I did not give her my son Shelah. Judah not only learns what it feels like to lose a son and want to protect your youngest, he's also publicly humiliated and publicly shown to be not only unrighteous, but also judgmental against someone who did the exact same thing he did. So how do we rule well? The first step in ruling well is getting your heart right before God. And how do we change our hearts? You can see your flaws and still not be able to change. I remember at one time in my life realizing that I was a horribly stingy person and not knowing what to do about it. How do we change our hearts? It's a big question. And it would be best if we were able to change without pain and humiliation and loss. But sadly, many times we can't, or we won't, or for whatever reason we don't. And it takes pain. It takes loss. Most people know the deepest kind of loss that Judah experienced. And if you don't yet, you will. And I wish that we could change without that. Let me read you a couple verses from James. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials. So many times we read this and we're like, yeah, trials, because I had a flat tire. I had to wait for 2 hours. That's not a trial. Losing a loved one is a trial. Consider it all joy how can we consider that joy? Knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let this endurance have its perfect result so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Because trials change us. God changes us through trials. I think the whole story of the Old Testament and the Jews would show us that God would be happy to change us without pain. But so many times we are unable to. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for your word. There is so much in every passage. And God, forgive us for our stubbornness and our pride and our selfishness and our bitterness at those closest to us, spouses, siblings. God, our hearts wander from you so easily. God, in some way, we want you to change us. In other ways, we don't. God, our motives are often so mixed. So many times we don't even know our own motives. We don't know our own hearts. But you do. God, search our hearts. Change us. Change us in whatever way we need. We ask that you do it in gracious and easy ways. But God, if it must be in painful, humiliating ways, we leave that up to your wisdom. God, please, the next time we encounter trials, let them change us. Let our hearts be soft and teachable. God, for all these people in this room who have a faithful pastor who teaches them the word every week and who have a Bible and have freedom to read it as often as they like, please help them to be teachable from your word and from the sermons so that they don't have to have pain. God, we know that not everything that happens is because of something in us that needs to change. Sometimes there are other causes. But God, we want to be closer to you. We need you to draw us to you. We need you to bind our hearts to you. Fill us with love, God. Fill us with love for you and for those around us. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.